In a week marked by significant legal and political maneuvers, the Trump administration has seen both a strategic victory in the nation's highest court and an intensified standoff with prominent news organizations. These developments underscore the ongoing friction between the executive branch and established institutions, from the judiciary to the independent press, shaping the landscape of American governance and public information. On Friday, the U.S. Supreme Court delivered a notable albeit partial win to President Trump, curtailing the power of federal judges to issue nationwide injunctions against executive orders. This decision emerged from a challenge to the administration's executive order seeking to end birthright citizenship, a move that would deny citizenship to U.S.-born children of undocumented individuals. While the conservative majority did not rule on the constitutionality of the birthright citizenship order itself, they sharply criticized the practice of universal injunctions, which have been a persistent source of frustration for the Trump administration, facing numerous legal challenges to its policies. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, writing for the majority, asserted federal courts do not exercise general oversight of the executive branch. They resolve cases and controversies consistent with the authority Congress has given them. When a court concludes that the executive branch has acted unlawfully, the answer is not for the court to exceed its power to. However, the ruling's immediate impact on the birthright citizenship order remains ambiguous, as the court left open the possibility for it to remain blocked nationwide. This ambiguity has plunged families into profound uncertainty. New York State Attorney General Letitia James described the ruling as a profound and disappointing setback for the families who now face tremendous uncertainty and danger for the millions of people who rely on the courts to protect their constitutional rights and for the fundamental rule of law. New York was one of 19 states that joined the suit against the executive order, with James emphasizing every child born on U.S. soil is a citizen of this country, no matter which state they are born in. This has been the law of the land for more than a century. She vowed this is not over, expressing confidence that the case defending birthright citizenship would ultimately prevail. Conversely, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi celebrated the ruling, stating on social media that the Supreme Court had instructed district courts to stop the endless barrage of nationwide injunctions against President Trump. For immigrant rights groups, the decision was met with dismay, with Lupe M. Rodriguez, executive director for the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Justice, warning of the chaos and confusion for families across the country as citizenship may depend on the state you were born in, fearing it could lead to discrimination, statelessness, and a fundamental erosion of rights. Juan Proano, CEO of the League of United Latin American Citizens, predicted the ruling would jam up the legal system, with an increase in individual lawsuits, lamenting that the Supreme Court had turned its back on a fundamental American principle. Concurrent with this judicial development, President Trump escalated his long-running feud with the media, threatening to sue the New York Times and CNN over their reporting on a preliminary intelligence assessment concerning U.S. strikes on Iran. The reports, based on a classified Defense Intelligence Agency document, suggested that the American attack had set back Iran's nuclear program by only a few months, directly contradicting the president's repeated assertions that the strikes had obliterated Iran's nuclear capabilities and brought peace to the region. In a letter to the Times, Mr. Trump's personal lawyer Alejandro Brito demanded a retraction and apology, labeling the article false, defamatory, and unpatriotic, claiming it undermined the credibility and integrity of President Trump. Both the New York Times and CNN steadfastly rejected these demands. David McCraw, the Times' lawyer, responded unequivocally, "No retraction is needed. No apology will be forthcoming. We told the truth to the best of our ability. We will continue to do so." He underscored that the administration did not dispute the existence or initial findings of the report, only its preliminary nature. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth also weighed in, reiterating complaints about the journalists while not denying the report's existence. This legal threat marks another chapter in the administration's concerted effort to delegitimize independent news organizations, a pattern seen in previous lawsuits filed by Mr. Brito against other media outlets, including a defamation suit against ABC News that resulted in a $15 million settlement to Mr. Trump's future presidential foundation. These twin developments highlight the administration's persistent strategy of challenging established checks and balances, whether by seeking to limit judicial oversight or by directly confronting the press. The Supreme Court's ruling, while technically a procedural victory, could lead to a fragmented legal landscape where executive orders face varying levels of enforcement across states, potentially increasing litigation and creating widespread confusion. Simultaneously, the aggressive stance against news organizations raises critical questions about press freedom and the public's right to access unvarnished information, particularly on matters of national security. As the legal battles continue on both fronts, the long-term implications for constitutional authority, media independence, and the very definition of citizenship in the U.S. remain in flux, poised to shape political discourse and policy for years to come. The geopolitical landscape shifted dramatically this week as the Trump administration navigated the complex aftermath of its recent airstrikes on Iran, facing heightened scrutiny from Capitol Hill and the public while simultaneously battling domestic legislative hurdles and significant legal challenges. The confluence of these events paints a vivid picture of an administration under intense pressure, grappling with both international fallout and deeply entrenched political divisions at home. Central to the week's developments were the U.S. strikes against Iran's nuclear enrichment facilities, an operation the White House vigorously defended even as dissenting intelligence assessments emerged. Top administration officials, including Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Dan Kane, briefed senators on the strikes. However, the session did little to quell bipartisan concerns. Senator Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut, sharply criticized President Trump's assertion that the United States had obliterated Iran's nuclear program, calling the president deliberately misleading. This sentiment was echoed by Senator Richard Blumenthal, also a Connecticut Democrat, who deemed the obliterated claim much too strong and emphasized that Iran continues to be a threat. Conversely, Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican from South Carolina, maintained that Iran had been weakened, though he cautioned that it is not over until the regime decides to change their attitude and their behavior. The debate over the strike's true impact intensified following a leaked Defense Intelligence Agency (DIA) preliminary assessment, which suggested the damage might only set back Iran's nuclear program by several months. This contrasted sharply with the administration's more definitive claims. Defense Secretary Hegseth, during a Pentagon briefing, vehemently criticized the media for reporting on this initial assessment, accusing outlets of cheering against Trump so hard and engaging in irresponsible reporting based on leaks, preliminary information in low confidence. He defended the efficacy of the strikes, stating, "Anyone with two eyes, some ears, and a brain can recognize that kind of firepower with that specificity at that location and others is gonna have a devastating effect." Yet Hegseth notably dodged questions regarding whether enriched uranium had been moved from the targeted sites prior to the strikes, a critical point raised by Representative Jim Himes, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Himes argued that the discussion of obliteration misses the point if Iran had already relocated necessary materials for a bomb. The White House, in response to the leaks, announced plans to limit intelligence sharing with Congress via the CapNet system, a move Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat from New York, condemned as an attempt to control the narrative and prevent the facts to get out. The international ramifications of the strikes were immediate and severe. An NBC News Decision Desk poll revealed that 45% of Americans opposed the airstrikes compared to 38% who support them, indicating a divided public. In Iran, lawmakers voted almost unanimously to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA), the UN's nuclear watchdog, a move that will significantly hinder the international community's ability to assess damage and monitor the country's nuclear activities. This was followed by chants of "death to America" and "death to Israel," underscoring the escalating tensions. Despite this, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated the administration remains on a diplomatic path with Iran, with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in communication with Iranian officials. Domestically, the administration pushed forward with its legislative agenda and faced a series of legal and political challenges. President Trump held a White House event to promote the One Big Beautiful Bill, a sweeping Republican domestic policy legislation. However, the bill faces significant hurdles in the Senate, including an extended parliamentary scrub, making the administration's goal of signing it by July 4 a difficult feat. During his remarks, Trump falsely claimed the bill would end taxes on Social Security benefits, a provision that Senate rules would not permit. The president also renewed his attacks on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, urging interest rate cuts to stimulate economic growth, a position Powell has resisted. In the judicial realm, the Supreme Court delivered a significant, albeit temporary, victory for the Trump administration, ruling 6-3 that lower courts had overstepped their authority by issuing nationwide injunctions against restrictions to birthright citizenship. This decision will make it harder to block other new policies and provides a boost to the administration, which is defending itself against over 400 challenges to its wide-ranging efforts. Separately, former Trump legal advisor Kenneth Cassebro was disbarred in New York over his role in the scheme to overturn the 2020 election results, a stark reminder of the ongoing legal fallout from that period, further raising concerns about judicial process. A top Justice Department official boasted about coordinating with the Texas Attorney General to swiftly kill the Texas Dream Act, leading to accusations of collusion and legal choreography by outside organizations. Beyond these major headlines, the political landscape continued to churn with new developments and emerging figures. New York Assemblyman Zoran Mamdani, a self-described democratic socialist, leveraged a viral social media strategy to rise from obscurity to apparent victory in New York City's Democratic mayoral primary, challenging incumbent Eric Adams. In Kentucky, Republican businessman Nate Morris, an ally of Vice President J.D. Vance, launched his campaign for Senator Mitch McConnell's retiring seat, framing the election as a referendum on Mitch McConnell's record. Meanwhile, Representative Elise Stefanik is reportedly taking steps to run for governor in New York, and Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker announced his bid for a third term, positioning himself as a vocal opponent of Trump's policies and fueling speculation about a 2028 presidential run. As the dust settles on a tumultuous week, the Trump administration faces a complex web of challenges. The efficacy and implications of the Iran strikes remain hotly contested, threatening to further strain relations with Congress and potentially escalate tensions in the Middle East. Domestically, the struggle to pass key legislation, coupled with ongoing legal battles and the shifting dynamics of upcoming elections, ensures that the political environment will remain charged. The coming weeks will undoubtedly test the administration's ability to navigate these multifaceted pressures, with significant implications for both national security and the future of American policy. In a day marked by significant political and legal developments, the Trump administration celebrated a pivotal Supreme Court victory while navigating a complex web of legislative battles, ongoing trade negotiations, and escalating cultural clashes. President Donald Trump, seizing the moment, held a previously unscheduled White House news conference on Friday, broadcasting live as he declared a major win against what he termed imperial judges who had frequently blocked his policies nationwide. The Supreme Court's ruling, penned by Justice Amy Coney Barrett, effectively ordered lower courts to review their temporary blocks on administration policies, a decision that Trump hailed as bringing the Constitution back. Specifically, the case addressed the president's executive order limiting birthright citizenship established under the 14th Amendment, which Trump controversially stated was meant for the babies of slaves, not people trying to scam the system. Attorney General Pam Bondi, standing alongside the president, echoed his sentiments, asserting that the practice of rogue judges striking down President Trump's policies across the entire nation has finally ended, calling it a bipartisan problem that has lasted 5 presidential terms. The administration has faced an unprecedented number of injunctions, with 64 in the first term and over 200 lawsuits in the second, contrasting sharply with the 12 and 14 faced by former Presidents Obama and Biden, respectively. Beyond the courtroom, the administration wrestled with its ambitious domestic policy bill. Despite a self-imposed July 4 deadline for Congress to send the sweeping legislation to his desk, President Trump hinted at flexibility, acknowledging that the process can go longer. The bill, which includes significant tax cuts and increased border security spending, has faced numerous roadblocks in the Senate, primarily from the chamber's nonpartisan parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough. Provisions such as a measure to lessen restrictions on firearm silencers and a controversial plan to slash federal food assistance have been rejected for failing to meet budgetary rules necessary to shield the bill from a filibuster. Senate Republicans, however, have retooled their proposal to shift a percentage of SNAP costs to states based on error rates, a move that critics like Senator Amy Klobuchar argue will cut food assistance for millions of Americans to give tax breaks to billionaires. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office previously estimated the House version of these SNAP changes could save $285 billion over 9 years, but result in 1.3 million poor Americans losing access to aid. Meanwhile, the global economic landscape remained a focal point as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent signaled that trade negotiations with U.S. trading partners might extend beyond President Trump's July 8 deadline, potentially wrapping up by Labor Day. The United States is currently engaged with roughly 18 trading partners, including the European Union, Japan, Vietnam, India, and Malaysia, as foreign governments seek to avoid steep global tariffs initially announced in April but paused for 90 days. Despite the protracted talks, the S&P 500 index saw a rebound, climbing about 0.6%, returning to record territory last seen in February before the trade war sent markets into a downward spiral. This recovery is largely attributed to the administration backing away from or delaying some tariffs, though trade experts remain skeptical about the substantive nature of the deals, noting that comprehensive agreements typically take years to negotiate. Trump, undeterred by critics, mocked economists who predicted a recession due to tariffs, advising them to go back to business school. The administration's assertive stance extended to cultural and political realms. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced the renaming of the USNS Harvey Milk, a fleet replenishment ship named after one of the first openly gay elected officials, to Oscar V. Peterson, a World War II Medal of Honor recipient. Hegseth stated the decision was about taking the politics out of ship naming and aligning with the administration's drive to expunge diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts from the federal government. Concurrently, the House Judiciary Committee escalated its battle with Harvard University, issuing a subpoena for documents related to tuition and financial aid, alleging coordinated pricing practices among Ivy League schools. This move intensifies the Trump administration's broader effort to shift the ideological tilt of higher education, with Harvard becoming a symbol of resistance against a barrage of federal investigations and attempts to cut funding. On the political front, California Governor Gavin Newsom filed a high-profile defamation lawsuit against Fox News, seeking at least $787 million in damages and a court order to prevent the network from broadcasting segments falsely accusing him of lying about a phone call with President Trump. The lawsuit, mirroring the amount Fox News paid in the Dominion voting system settlement, stems from a dispute over the timeline of a call concerning Trump's activation of the National Guard in Los Angeles amid immigration crackdowns. Furthermore, the surprising victory of Zoran Mamdani, a Democratic Socialist and New York State Assemblyman in the New York City mayoral primary, triggered a wave of Islamophobic attacks from hard-right Republicans in Congress, including calls for his deportation and comparisons to 9/11. President Trump himself weighed in, incorrectly labeling Mamdani a communist, a tactic reminiscent of past birther controversies. As the day concluded, it painted a clear picture of an administration relentlessly pushing its agenda across multiple fronts. From reshaping judicial power and navigating legislative impasses to recalibrating global trade and engaging in sharp cultural and political conflicts, the events underscore the ongoing polarization and the multifaceted nature of governance in this era. The coming weeks will undoubtedly reveal the true impact of the Supreme Court's ruling on future policy implementations, the fate of the comprehensive domestic bill, and the continued evolution of the administration's approach to both domestic and international challenges. The economic landscape of the United States is currently navigating a complex confluence of policy shifts as the nation grapples with the far-reaching implications of renewed immigration enforcement and an ambitious yet tumultuous global trade agenda. These two pillars of federal policy, while seemingly distinct, are creating significant ripples across industries. From California's tech hubs and agricultural fields to the global supply chains of manufacturing giants posing critical questions about future growth, demographic shifts, and America's standing in the world. California, often seen as an economic bellwether, finds itself particularly vulnerable to the recent intensification of immigration crackdowns. The state's chief demographer has already noted that during a previous administration, California's population declined partly due to increased obstacles for foreign-born individuals entering the U.S., a concern echoed by the Newsom administration, which cites immigration policies as a significant economic risk in state budget forecasts. A full third of California's prime working-age population is comprised of immigrants, including a substantial number without legal authorization who, according to Giovanni Perry, an economics professor at UC Davis, represent roughly a tenth of the state's workforce. These individuals are deeply integrated, with undocumented workers averaging 15 years in the U.S. and often having American citizen children. Perry emphasizes they have family and they have kids who are American citizens normally. So these are people very well integrated in the economy of California. The state's immigrant community is remarkably diverse, with 49% from Latin American countries and 41% from Asia, and for the past decade more immigrants have arrived from Asia. The implications of a slowed immigrant inflow are profound. California is already projected to lose at least one more congressional seat after the 2030 census, and stricter immigration policies could further erode its electoral college dominance. While domestic outmigration has been a long-standing trend, immigration has historically offset this loss, maintaining California's population figures. Eric McGee, a demographer at the Public Policy Institute of California, warns if that immigration stops, then that's going to have some real consequences for our population growth and ultimately for our representation for sure. This extends beyond political representation to the very fabric of the state's economy. Key sectors like hospitality, construction, and agriculture heavily rely on this labor force. A recent report by UC Merced and the Bay Area Council Economic Institute estimates that removing all undocumented immigrants from California would slash economic activity by $275 billion, or 9% of the state's GDP, with construction and agriculture seeing 16% and 14% reductions respectively. Abby Raish, research director at the Bay Area Council Economic Institute, notes most of this population has very deep and long-standing ties to the state of California. They're really embedded in our economy, both in dollars and cents and institutional knowledge. Despite popular rhetoric, a 2024 Pew Research Center report found that 3/4 of U.S. registered voters, including 59% of those who backed the former president, agree that immigrants without proper authorization largely fill jobs American citizens do not want. This is underscored by data showing 85% of California adults without authorization work, compared to 62% of the overall working-age population, contributing billions in tax revenue without access to welfare support. The recent Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE raids, particularly those observed in Los Angeles area Home Depot parking lots, have sent a chilling effect through day laborer communities nationwide. George Carrillo, CEO of the Hispanic Construction Council, estimates a nationwide construction workforce shortage of 500,000 workers, with projects now 22% behind schedule, up from 14% when the previous administration took office. Day laborers are scared to death to show up at places like Lowe's, Home Depot, etc. because they do not want to be arrested by ICE, says labor consultant Jason Greer. While Home Depot maintains a no-solicitation policy and states it is not involved in ICE operations, the fear is palpable. Rick Herman, CEO of staffing agency HireQuest, highlights the complex paradox. Lax enforcement creates competitive disadvantages for legal businesses, but crackdowns shrink the labor pool, driving up wages and contributing to inflation. Loren Locke, an Atlanta-based immigration attorney, characterizes the parking lot sweeps as easy pickings for ICE to hit daily arrest quotas, arguing they fail to address the deeper unsustainable complexities of U.S. immigration policy. Simultaneously, the global trade landscape is undergoing a significant recalibration as the U.S. progresses on its ambitious tariff and trade agenda. On Thursday, the U.S. and China took a notable step towards stabilizing relations, with President Trump announcing a framework agreement had been signed, though details remain sparse. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent later clarified that U.S. tariffs on Chinese imports would begin at 30%, with China's reciprocal tariffs at 10%. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick confirmed China's commitment to deliver rare earths, leading to the removal of U.S. countermeasures. The administration is also pushing for agreements with 10 other key trading partners, with Bessent optimistically projecting that major trade deals could be wrapped up by Labor Day. This newfound flexibility marks a shift from the administration's self-imposed July 9 deadline for broader tariff impositions. White House Council of Economic Advisers Chairman Stephen Miron indicated that extending the tariff pause makes sense for countries negotiating in good faith, signaling a willingness to avoid disrupting ongoing progress. While a trade deal with the United Kingdom has been firmed up, negotiations with the European Union, Japan, India, and others have proven more challenging, with looming U.S. tariffs of up to 50% on EU imports. Companies like Nike are already forecasting significant hits to profits, with the sportswear giant anticipating a $1 billion tariff impact this year, likely leading to higher consumer prices. The cost of toys, 75% of which are made in China, is also rising, prompting some Chinese manufacturers to relocate production to countries like Vietnam to circumvent tariffs. The economic fallout of these trade policies is becoming increasingly evident. J.P. Morgan analysts warn of a potential stagflationary slowdown in the U.S. economy, with a 40% chance of recession in the second half of 2025. Companies like General Mills and FedEx have already projected lower profits due to macroeconomic uncertainty and volatile global demand. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell acknowledged the uncertainty surrounding tariff-related inflation, stating, "We really don't know how much of that's going to be passed through to the consumers. We just don't know. We won't know until we see it." Meanwhile, the EU has vowed retaliatory tariffs on U.S. imports, including Boeing planes, if a 10% baseline tariff remains. Beyond direct economic impacts, the uncertainty generated by these policies is affecting consumer confidence and global investment decisions. The National Foundation for American Policy estimates that the U.S. lost at least $335 billion in economic growth between 2016 and 2022 due to a slowdown in foreign-born workers. As the U.S. navigates these dual economic currents, the interconnectedness of immigration and trade policies becomes starkly apparent. The nation's ability to attract and retain talent, particularly in high-growth sectors like technology, where 2/3 of Silicon Valley workers are foreign-born, directly impacts its innovation capacity and revenue streams. Simultaneously, the push for new trade agreements and the imposition of tariffs are reshaping global supply chains, affecting everything from manufacturing costs to consumer prices. The coming months, particularly leading up to the Labor Day target for trade deals, will be crucial in determining the trajectory of the U.S. economy. The challenge lies in crafting comprehensive, stable policies that foster growth and address underlying economic realities rather than relying on piecemeal or disruptive measures. The long-term prosperity of the nation hinges on finding a sustainable balance that acknowledges the deep integration of immigrants into the economy and the complex interdependencies of global trade. In a clear signal of escalating global tensions and a rapidly evolving threat landscape, major defense powers and alliances are significantly recalibrating their national security strategies, with a pronounced emphasis on technological superiority and cybersecurity. This week, two critical developments underscored this shift. NATO members agreed to a substantial increase in defense spending with a dedicated allocation for cyber capabilities, while the United States outlined its own robust defense budget proposals and expanded military presence along its southern border. At a pivotal summit in The Hague, NATO allies reached a landmark agreement to boost their defense expenditures to an ambitious 5% of GDP within the next decade. This new target, a significant leap from previous commitments, carves out a crucial 1.5% of GDP specifically for indirect defense spending, including vital cybersecurity capabilities. The remaining 3.5% will be channeled into core defense. This expanded definition of defense spending now encompasses investments in energy and supply chain resilience, logistics, infrastructure, and innovation, a direct response to strategic concerns ignited by Russia's full-blown invasion of Ukraine and the systemic challenges posed by China's stated ambitions and coercive policies. As described by NATO, the urgency of this focus on cyber defenses comes as experts warn that even incidents below the threshold of armed conflict are having strategically consequential effects on allied nations. Further reinforcing this commitment, NATO itself has agreed to launch an integrated cyber defense center at its military headquarters in Mons, Belgium. As NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte articulated at the summit's opening, security can no longer be thought of just as the traditional realms of air, sea, and land, but also of technology, of cyber, of the strength of our democratic society. While some military cyber commands and operational network protections will fall under the core 3.5% commitment, the broader 1.5% for civilian investments like critical national infrastructure protection lacks a standardized definition, raising concerns among some, including German think tank Bertelsmann Stiftung, that this conceptually broad, functionally vague allowance could lead to creative accounting by some allies. This dramatic increase in NATO spending is widely seen as a direct response to decades of criticism, particularly from the United States, regarding the disproportionate burden it has carried for the alliance's defense. As of NATO's official estimates for 2024, the United States accounted for a staggering 66% of the alliance's entire defense spending, despite representing only 55% of its combined GDP. President Donald Trump has been particularly vocal in his demands for European allies to contribute more, with Secretary-General Rutte even crediting Trump for the allies' commitment, lightheartedly remarking that "Daddy has to sometimes use strong language." Despite past bombastic statements from President Trump questioning the U.S. commitment to delinquent allies, he affirmed his steadfast support for NATO's Article 5 defense commitment during the conference, stating, "I stand with it. That's why I'm here. If I didn't stand with it, I wouldn't be here," even as Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez indicated his country would not meet the new 5% target. Domestically, the United States is also bolstering its defense posture, with senior officials from the U.S. Department of Defense outlining President Trump's proposed FY26 defense budget. This comes alongside the ongoing expansion of military defense areas along the nation's southern border. Following an executive order signed by President Trump in April aimed at repelling invasions, the Air Force has announced the establishment of a new 250-mile National Defense Area (NDA) in South Texas, covering portions of the Rio Grande River. This marks the third such area, joining over 200 miles of NDA already monitored by a federal task force created in March in New Mexico and West Texas. These NDAs, administered as part of Joint Base San Antonio, will see immediate enforcement through signage monitoring temporary barriers and the temporary detention of trespassers for transfer to law enforcement. This effort is spearheaded by the Joint Task Force Southern Border (JTFSB), activated by U.S. Northern Command, which is responsible for full-scale agile and all-domain operations to secure the border and ensure U.S. territorial integrity. The financial backing for these ambitious border security initiatives is expected to come in part from the proposed One Big Beautiful Bill Act (H.R. 1). This bill, which has passed the U.S. House and is pending in the Senate, earmarks a substantial $46.5 billion for southern border physical security and proposes to reimburse states like Texas for their prior efforts, such as Governor Greg Abbott's Operation Lone Star. While President Trump is pushing for an expedited passage, the bill faces legislative hurdles, including rejections of key provisions by the Senate parliamentarian, which Trump has openly acknowledged as a little difficult, alongside claims of Democratic opposition due to the bill's perceived political benefits for Republicans. Beyond border security, President Trump also touched upon broader geopolitical concerns, reiterating his claims regarding the obliteration of Iranian nuclear sites. He asserted that the U.S. was the only ones that could have done it and expressed confidence that Iran would not go back into nuclear anytime soon, underscoring his administration's assertive stance on preventing nuclear proliferation. These concurrent developments paint a picture of a world bracing for increased instability, where traditional military might is increasingly intertwined with technological prowess and cyber resilience. From NATO's ambitious spending targets and its new cyber defense center to the U.S.'s expanded border security zones and its proposed defense budget, the emphasis is clear: nations are investing heavily in a multi-domain defense strategy. The challenges, however, remain significant, from standardizing indirect defense spending to navigating complex domestic political landscapes to secure funding. As technology continues to redefine the battleground, the coming years will undoubtedly see an accelerating integration of cutting-edge solutions into national and collective defense frameworks, shaping the future of global security. The global geopolitical landscape is currently undergoing a significant recalibration, marked by a complex interplay of shifting alliances, assertive diplomacy, and calculated military actions. At the heart of this evolving order lies the distinctive foreign policy approach of the Trump administration, which seeks to redraw traditional lines and redefine America's role on the world stage, often with surprising results. From ambitious attempts to reshape the Sino-Russian axis to high-stakes diplomatic overtures in the Middle East, the current White House strategy is testing the limits of international relations, prompting both profound shifts and enduring challenges. A central tenet of the administration's foreign policy involves a controversial reverse Nixon strategy, an ambitious gambit aimed at drawing Russia closer to the United States as a counterbalance to China. This approach, which contrasts sharply with President Richard Nixon's 1972 move to warm U.S.-China ties to isolate the Soviet Union, reflects a desire to prevent Moscow and Beijing from forming an impenetrable bloc. As President Trump himself articulated to Fox News, "As a student of history, I've looked at all of history. The first thing you learn is that you don't want Russia and China to go together." He further asserted to Breitbart News that if improved U.S.-Russia relations could lead Moscow to disengage from China, it would be a good thing. This perspective, however, appears to overlook the deep-seated realities of the current Sino-Russian alignment. Indeed, the bonds between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping are described as unprecedented, with over 40 meetings since 2013, underscoring a strong personal rapport. Moreover, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine has inextricably linked Russia and China's interests, leading to a surge in economic cooperation. Bilateral trade has hit new records each year since Russia's 2022 invasion, with China becoming Moscow's leading trading partner for energy exports and crucial advanced technology imports, providing a vital lifeline amidst Western sanctions. This robust economic partnership, coupled with deepening military and nuclear power cooperation, as evidenced by agreements signed during President Xi's attendance at Russia's May 9 Victory Day parade, where he was honored as Putin's most distinguished guest, presents significant obstacles to any U.S. attempt at division. Initially, Beijing reportedly harbored consternation over the conciliatory tone adopted by the Trump administration towards President Putin. However, China has since signaled caution regarding the limits of any U.S.-Russian détente, with Foreign Minister Wang Yi stating on April 1 that the reverse Nixon strategy is impractical, and reaffirming the no-limits partnership between Beijing and Moscow, echoing President Xi's declaration from February 2022. Russia, for its part, remains ambivalent to Trump's overtures, influenced by the U.S. president's unpredictable nature, significant domestic opposition within the U.S. elite to his Russia approach, and the understanding that Trump's potential four-year tenure pales in comparison to the likely enduring relationship between Putin and Xi. Despite the White House's efforts to broker peace in Ukraine, including a willingness to recognize Crimea as Russian territory, Moscow's ambitions appear to surpass what Trump is willing or able to offer, further cementing its reliance on China. The most likely scenario, according to analyses, suggests that Sino-Russian ties will only deepen, frustrating Trump's strategic objective. Concurrently, the Trump administration has been actively pursuing peace in the Middle East, particularly with Iran, despite highly charged rhetoric and recent military actions. Following American Operation Midnight Hammer airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and a retaliatory strike on a U.S. military base in Qatar, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei defiantly stated Tehran would never surrender and warned of further targeting U.S. bases. Yet White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt affirmed on June 27, 2025, that the administration views the Middle East as shifting away from chaos and bloodshed and moving toward the beginning stages of a new era of peace and stability. She emphasized the president wants peace. He always has, and right now we're on a diplomatic path with Iran, even as a direct meeting with Iran remained unscheduled despite Trump's earlier assertion it would occur. This peace through strength approach, characterized by a dual-track strategy of applying pressure while keeping diplomatic channels open, has resonated with the American public. A national survey conducted by American Pulse Research and polling from June 23 to 25, 2025, immediately following the U.S. airstrikes and subsequent ceasefire, revealed solid majorities of support for Trump's handling of the crisis. 56% approved of his efforts to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, with 54% approving specifically of the airstrikes. The poll also indicated that 51% of respondents viewed Trump more favorably due to his actions. A significant 71% of voters across the political spectrum believe that if Iran acquires a nuclear weapon, it would use it, underscoring the public's understanding of the high stakes involved. This robust support suggests Americans perceive Trump's policy as effectively deterring adversaries and making the nation safer, a message also heard in capitals like Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang. However, domestic anxieties persist. The same survey found that 61% of Americans believe cartels and sleeper cells likely exploited the previous administration's open border policies, reflecting deep concerns about national security vulnerabilities. This domestic backdrop informs the public's appreciation for a decisive yet diplomatically open foreign policy. As the current administration navigates these complex global dynamics, the future remains fluid. While the reverse Nixon strategy faces formidable headwinds from the entrenched and mutually beneficial Russia-China alliance, the U.S. continues to seek a strategic edge. In the Middle East, the expansion of the Abraham Accords, historic diplomatic agreements brokered by the first Trump administration between Israel and several Arab nations, remains a core objective for achieving lasting peace. The coming years will undoubtedly reveal whether the administration's bold, often unconventional approach can fundamentally reshape the international order, or if the deeply rooted geopolitical realities will ultimately constrain its most ambitious designs.